Good morning, everybody. In the second day of our convening, we'll be focused on religious pluralism, the challenges of Palestinians in Israel grappling with the nation-state law, and finally, the possibilities for rebuilding and repair after the war. Last night, we explored the state of affairs in Israel today, the key role of cultural institutions, libraries and museums in times of war, trauma as a component of conflict, and finally, the critical role of the Attorney General and the Supreme Court in ensuring Israeli democracy. Convening is the attempt to build ties across difference. I think that what is unique in our gathering is the effort to have panels that feature conversations between people who might not ordinarily speak together, enabling new kinds of dialogue. For example, we heard from the visionary Rabbi Tamar Elad Applebaum and speaking with, alongside a Middle East policy expert, David Makovsky, to ensure new sorts of to think through new sorts of possibilities for the day after. In the past year, the effort to gather different kinds of people together to discuss challenging topics has been more critical than ever. Given that Israel is at a crossroads and that we ourselves in the US are in uncharted territory, I look forward to hearing more and considering what Israel's best options are now and how we in the US can support Israel's path forward. Again, I am pleased to welcome our presenters, some of whom have just traveled directly from Israel to provide us with a better sense of the complexity of the moment. As I mentioned yesterday, I'm very grateful to so many hardworking people at JTS, too many to name here, but I'd especially like to thank Chancellor Shuli Reuben Schwartz, Vice Chancellor for Religious Life and Engagement Gordon Tucker, Rabbi Gordon Tucker, Chancellor Emeritus Arnold Eisen, Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees John Lepotin, Provost Jeff Kress, and Vice Chancellor for Institutional Advancement, Rabbi Joel Seltzer. They have all provided the leadership which has been critical in making this particular convening possible. As Director of Convenings, it's been my pleasure to shape these high-level conversations that speak to concerns of the day. Before we begin, I would like to ask this audience to please be respectful of diverse points of view in questions and conversations. And with this, I'd like to turn things over to Rabbi Gordon Tucker, who will be giving a few opening remarks and then moderating our opening session on religious pluralism in Israeli society. Thank you very much.
So a good morning from me as well. Another thing that we kind of is a standard request at these things is to make sure that phones don't make their presence known in the middle of the session. You all know how to do that, so we appreciate that. I want to remind everyone of something that I began with yesterday, to note that there are cards in many places. Saray Crane is outside, often at a table outside, about registering to vote in the World Zionist Congress election. And you can learn more at that table about the different slates, and the slate that is stands most closely to the principles that are constantly taught and promoted in this institution, the Merkaz slate, and this is a way to make one's voice heard as to what the priorities in Israel should be. I also want to say a little bit, Tamara has just given you a little bit of a conspectus of what we have done yesterday and will do today. There will be an afterlife to this as well, which we always have planned to do and have done in our previous convenings. There will, all of the sessions but the first have been recorded. They will be on our website, and there will be a webinar series to follow up, and there's a podcasting going on even as we speak, I think, with Ellie Gettinger from our the staff of the Lifelong and Professional Learning. And there is a cadre of educators here for the conference, and there will be a follow-up meeting tomorrow to begin to plan how the things that have emerged from these conversations will be able to be converted into teaching materials, learning materials in different places. So I wanted to make that clear and reassure you that it doesn't just end today, but we'll have echoes and ripples going forward, which is of course part of the whole point of having these convenings. So a couple of words about the structure of things in this first session. It's a little bit different than the previous ones because it has this two-part structure to it with some breakout afterwards. So we will have about 75 minutes for presentations from the panelists, whom I will introduce in a moment. There'll be a few questions, perhaps from me as the moderator, and we may have time for a few from the audience. We don't need a lot of time for the few from the audience because what we have built in here is another hour of breakout groups where our panelists and whom I identify them in a moment, and another important person who is here from Israel, also to be identified in a moment, will be available to facilitate discussions of things that you may want to raise that have come up at this session, or maybe that you've connected with something that was in a previous session, and it will enable informal conversation. One of the things we learned from previous convenings here is that there is a kind of a thirst from people who attend to be a little less passive and to be able to have these more informal conversations. So they will be in particular places. So our panelists are Rabbi Seth Farber, who is an Orthodox rabbi and social activist. In 2002, he founded ITIM, the Jewish Life Advocacy Center. It's an organization that envisions Israel as a country that is respectful and responsive to the Jewish needs of the Jewish people. He's a licensed member of Israel's Chief Rabbinate. He's the founder of Kehilat Netivot in Ra'anana, where he lives with his wife Michelle and their 5 children. He was ordained by Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan's Theological Seminary of Yeshiva University, received a BA from New York University, an MA in Judaic Studies from Yeshiva University, and then in a bold departure from the island of Manhattan, he earned a PhD in Jewish history from the Hebrew University. And since founding ITIM, he has become a leading figure in religion and state issues in Israel. He's often cited by the media. I gather that happened as recently as this morning, and sought after as a public speaker for reasons that will become evident to you. And he was honored with a Nefesh B'Nefesh Bonei Tzion Prize in 2015, and in 2018, he was awarded the prize by Israel's Ministry of Immigration for his singular contributions to Israeli society. Rakefet Ginsberg holds a bachelor's and master's degree in social work from Tel Aviv University. She is the first woman to serve as Mankalit, as executive director of the Masorti conservative movement in Israel. Some years prior, immediately following her return As an emissary on behalf of the Jewish Agency in the United States, she had joined the movement staff and took on the challenging role of Director of Congregations. She has extensive experience in community work, development, and management of community programs and projects, and as a facilitator of processes of change in organizations and communities. Rakefet serves as chairperson of the Counseling Center for Women. She's a member of the board of directors of the Schechter Rabbinical Seminary. In recent years, she led a team of therapists and facilitators in developing community resilience and group interventions within the community unit at Natal, the Israel Trauma and Resiliency Center. And having mentioned the Schechter Rabbinical Seminary, I want to note that we are joined here. I'm looking for Ari Hasit. I saw you a minute ago. He's all the way in the back. Would you just stand up? What? Stand up for a second, Ari. Ari Hasit is the Associate Dean at the Schechter Rabbinical Seminary in Israel, and he will be also facilitating one of the breakout groups afterwards. So you may, we'll try to keep these more or less evenly populated. Let me explain what's going to happen. So our two panelists, Rabbi Farber and Ms. Ginsberg, will be facilitating two of these breakout sessions. One of them is in the presentation room over there with Rakefet, and with Seth Farber, it'll be in the Beit Midrash, which is just off the lobby, the entry lobby. As you're facing outward, it'll be to your right, but there'll be people there to direct you. And Ari Hasit will be up on the second floor at the Seminary Women's League Synagogue. Rabbi Luciana Lederman, who's the director of our Beit Midrash, will at the same time, for those who wish, be doing a study session on rabbinic texts on religious pluralism. And that is listed in our program as being here in the auditorium, but we are actually moving it to a room adjacent to the Beit Midrash. We call it the Beit Midrash Annex. You will be directed there as well. So those who want to study with her will be able to do that as well. And now and I'll repeat those, the locations when we get to that. So just to frame this session's topic, I want to say a couple of opening words. First of all, it's not a random fact that I am the one chairing this session, because religious pluralism has been very, very important to me for many years. And I actually am a past chair of the Masorti Foundation for Conservative Judaism in Israel. It's a United States, based here in the United States, and supportive of and raising funds to support the Masorti movement. I was a rabbi for 24 years in White Plains, New York. Hanging over the entrance to my synagogue, I call it my synagogue because I now sit in the pews, hanging over the entrance from the time that I was the rabbi there at Temple Israel Center is a banner that proclaims the following words: wherever we stand with Israel. Many people have kind of misinterpreted that to mean my country, right or wrong. But that's not what it means, or wasn't what it was intended to mean. It actually was a banner put up by all the 4 synagogues of different movements in White Plains. It was meant as an expression in our local community of a profound unity that underlies a healthy pluralism. There were synagogues of 4 different religious movements that subscribed to this slogan and this banner. We all worshiped differently. We all studied Torah differently. We provided Jewish education for our children with different emphases. We interpreted Jewish texts and Jewish history differently. And still, we were able to recognize that we shared a deep commitment to and love for the state of Israel. For all of the challenges that American Jewry faces today, and none of us should be oblivious to those challenges, it's one of the glories of the American Jewish community that such things can happen. You know, when I was a student in the early grades in what was an Orthodox day school a little over 60 blocks north of here, we were taught to sing this song. Eretz Yisrael beli Torah, hi keguf beli neshama. The land of Israel without Torah is like a body without a soul. But that begs the question of just what is Torah? And that's the question that hovers over all of this. Isn't the Jewish state the one place in which everyone's conscientious understanding of Torah and God's will should be respected, welcomed, and included? It doesn't seem possible that the Zionist project was just about transplanting the religious life of the Eastern European shtetl to the Middle East with no change or no development, save for having an army to protect it, no small thing. Wasn't it always meant to hold the promise of a secure home that would make possible an outpouring of creative flowering of which Jews had been deprived for so long? So this morning's session is about the pressing question of whether that promise can and will be fully realized. Some of it is being realized, and you will hear that from our wonderful panelists. And among the reasons the question is pressing is the fact that it should be obvious that a preemptive supremacy of centuries-old religious laws and customs are just not going to speak to the spiritual urgings and longings of many or most modern Israeli Jews. Acknowledging this plain fact takes nothing away from the legitimacy of privately practicing the sort of Judaism that's enshrined by the Chief Rabbinate. But simple logic indicates that an insistence that there is only one way to be Jewish will lose many Israeli Jews to Judaism and will see Judaism's own growth potential stifled by a state-sanctioned freezing of Jewish development. So with that framing, it's my great pleasure to ask Rabbi Seth Farber and my friend and colleague Rakefet Ginsberg to come up. We have decided that Rabbi Farber will be the first to present, and we look forward to it.
Good morning. Vayhi acharei hadvarim ha'eleh. After all these things, let's be honest. Our people are dysfunctional. We always have been. And because of that, I'd like to take you to a moment in our history where we sought for just a moment to address the dysfunctionality. After generations and generations of not just not getting along, where brothers tried to kill each other, where brothers dismissed each other for who they were, the family finally comes together at the end of the book of Genesis. After all this tragedy and all this trauma, for a moment, if just a moment, everybody is together. Joseph is told in the book of Genesis in chapter 48, "Hinei avicha choleh." Having brought the family together, Joseph is told, your father is sick. Vayikach et shnei banav imo. Joseph takes his two sons, Menashe and Ephraim, to meet his father, ostensibly for the last time. Jacob is told, your son, the viceroy, his children are coming before you. And Jacob proceeds to tell Joseph a concise form of Jewish history. He kind of rewrites Jewish history, forgetting about all the bad stuff, except for the loss of his wife. El Shaddai nira elai beluz beretz Canaan vayivarech oti. God appeared to me in Canaan. He blessed me. He promised me I would be a great nation. And then, unlike every story that we've known until now about the dysfunction of the family, Jacob promises Joseph that the family will come together again. A kibbutz galuyot, a returning of the exiles, of sorts, of course, it happens in exile. Your two sons who were born here in Egypt, Lihem, Ephraim Menashe, Reuven B'Shimon Yehuli. Your two sons who were born in Egypt, they will be mine. Everybody will be together again. And then the Bible gets to what I perceive to be the seminal verse of the book of Genesis, something that's so instructive for the discussion of Jewish pluralism in Israel. Having promised Joseph that his two sons will be Jacob's, the Bible records, Vayar Yisrael et b'nei Yosef, Jacob looked out at the two sons of Jacob, who he just promised were going to be his, and he says two words, Vayomer, mi ele. Who are these? This isn't just an informational question. It's an existential question. When Jacob looks at the story of the family coming together, it's alien to him. Think about the scene for a moment. Imagine what Joseph's children looked like. They probably got up that morning. They put on their Egyptian best, right? Their gold and their crowns and their scepters, and I don't know, maybe they put on that little crown that my daughter comes home from Gone with little, serpent coming out of the top. And I can only imagine that Jacob thought that Joseph's sons would come with their Rambam in one hand and their, Shulchan Aruch in the other hand. Mi ele. Mi ele is the question that's being asked over and over and over again in the state of Israel, thousands of times every week. Who are you? You know what they say about Israel? We love Aliyah and we hate Olim. It's much more than that. We can't stand the fact, we meaning the Jacobs, we can't stand the fact that this vision of the family coming together doesn't look like what we thought it was going to look like by any means. To the extent that, to a large extent, people deny that it even should exist. But if the question of mi'ele isn't just an informational question, if the question of Jewish pluralism is not just a question of information, it's also a question of existential character, and the response of Joseph is particularly instructive. Jacob looks and says, mi'ele, vayomer Yosef el aviv. Joseph looked to his father and said, banaihem asher natan li Elohim bazeh. This part has three parts to it. First, banaihem. These are my children. That's the first piece of it. The solution to a dysfunctional family, a family that doesn't get along, a family that refuses to respect, is to acknowledge we're all part of this. The second thing is, Asher Natan li Elohim. These are not just my children. I know they don't look like the way you thought they were going to look. I know that you didn't think that this is the way Jewish history was going to play itself out. This is part of a much, much bigger story. One that you, Jacob, don't understand. You've lost your perspective. You have no notion at all of the gravity of this situation. And it actually has a double aspect, because it's not just there's a bigger story. It's a bigger story that God planned. If all the Jews don't look exactly like you, Jacob, that's not because people didn't turn out the way you thought they would. It's because that's part of God's plan. There's a bigger story here than you see. And Bazeh, for those who remember the traditional interpretation that's brought in the Midrash and subsequently in Rashi, right? If you remember that text, Rashi says, Joseph, I love this line, that Joseph pulled out his ketubah he pulled out his marriage document with Osnat, the daughter of Potiphera, right, the queen, the priest of On, right? In other words, he says, I know my ketubah doesn't look like your ketubah, but that doesn't mean it's not a ketubah. And then there's an amazing pause in this story. Because if the first question is the transition from informational to existential, and the second question is known, and the response is there's a much, much bigger picture out here, and our solution to the diversity of our people is not to deny them who they are, but to embrace them for who they are and who they could be. The biblical text records, Vayomar, Jacob says, he doesn't even say it to Joseph. Kachem na'ilai vavarechem. Bring them close to me. I wish to bless them. This third dimension is actually the most dramatic. It demands from Joseph also something. We have to meet somewhere. For Jacob to bless, Joseph has to move as well. The story of Jewish pluralism in Israel is a painful story. It's a painful story that has a dramatic history of a series of bad decisions, of horrifying decisions. What I do at ITIM, we're trying to rectify the situation. We've helped more than 100,000 families navigate the labyrinths of the Jewish life in Israel. People who came to the Jewish state and said, I want to live Jewish. You'd think after 2,000 years we'd get that right, but quite the opposite. Over and over and over again, whether you're an immigrant from the FSU, from the former Soviet Union, or an immigrant from the States, or you grew up in Israel, over and over and over again, day after day, people are asking, Mi Eile, who are you? We know who you are, but who are you? We just finished a study. We interviewed 400 families that went through Israel's rabbinical courts. It's one of the streams, and it's in order to get married in Israel, you have to go through the rabbinical courts to either prove you're Jewish, if you're an immigrant from the former Soviet Union primarily, or if you want to get divorced. We asked couples, if you knew what you were going to go through, would you get married again? 40% said, wouldn't want to do it. That's a tragedy. It's a failure. It's not a failure of the religious authorities. It's a failure of the Zionist enterprise. We grew up, we were taught, I think it was a misteaching, that Herzl and Ben-Gurion were the great threat to traditional Judaism. That's what they taught us in Hebrew University, in the graduate school. They taught us that Zionism was considered the great threat to Judaism. Right? It was right after Hasidism, right? Zionism was right there. One of the things we've learned since October 7th, Achar Hadorim Ha'eleh, is that Zionism and Judaism actually have a capacity to go together, specifically when there's no religious coercion. It's not just that these individual stories of heroes, young men and young women, and older men and older women, who in the face of incredible catastrophe sought to express their Jewish lives. That's a symptom of something much, much bigger. It's a symptom of the fact that people in Israel feel strongly about their Judaism. Jews in Israel want to express their Judaism. So how can it be that 87% of Jewish Israelis say they have very, very little confidence in the religious establishment? But what I'm really here to tell you is not the horrifying stories I see every day. What I'm here to tell you is not only is there hope, but there's real hope. Sometimes we have to go to the courts. Sometimes we have to argue the case. Sometimes we have to work on regulations. But the most important thing is we have to tell a big story. There's a big story going on right now. My parents both ran from Europe. They're both survivors. My father was smuggling arms for the Haganah in 1947 in Berkeley. I grew up here with most of you, right? Screaming 1, 2, 3, 4, open up the iron door, 5, 6, 7, 8, let my people immigrate. I got to Israel and I thought we had made it. And then I realized the social fabric of Israel the opportunity to forge ahead with what Rabbi Ginsberg calls the third era in Jewish history, not only in his terminology of a new covenant, but a third era in Jewish history where we're now determining what Judaism is going to look like for the next millennia. That's incredibly, incredibly powerful. And there are signs in every way that things are changing. In every single way. I'll just give you one example. Okay? The new chief rabbi has been in power for 4.5 months. Okay? I met the previous chief rabbis in the first year of their term, once or twice. We said we would meet all the time. Never happened. The present chief rabbi has met me already 4 times. He's agreed to sit on panels with me. There's a dialogue going on. Something's changing. Something's changing not just in the leadership, something's changing in the Israel body politic. People are recognizing, they're waking up that Judaism is important to them, and they're not going to suffer anymore the ills and the failures of a religious establishment that keeps on asking, Mi Eile, who are you? We've been incredibly, incredibly successful in the courts, even as you pointed out this morning. We've been incredibly successful. If you open up, I'll just give you one example. If you open up, and I don't think any of you will do this, if you open up the website of the Religious Council in Kiryat Motzkin is a small town, northern Israel, you will find there an apology from the chief rabbi of Kiryat Motzkin to a mikveh attendant who 4 years ago, he called on the phone and said, at 8 o'clock at night, and he said, hey, are you a mikveh attendant who works for me? And she said, yes. And he said, are you the Ethiopian? And she said, yes. And he said, when did you convert? And she said, I didn't convert. And then he hung up the phone, and he sent out a WhatsApp to his community saying, which made it to her as well, because she's a member of one of the ultra-Orthodox synagogues in Kiryat Motzkin, that said, if you went to the mikveh with the Ethiopian attendant, please ask your rabbi if you have to go again. I'm not telling you that to horrify you. I'm telling you that to tell you after 4 years, he apologized. And that mikveh attendant was hosted by the chief rabbi of Israel 2 weeks ago in his office, where he apologized on behalf of the state of Israel for the way she was treated. So yes, sometimes we have to use the courts, and sometimes we have to use policymakers, and sometimes we have to use the press. But some things are changing. Some things are changing where more and more people are saying, Banayhem, asher natan li Elohim bazeh. And here I'll get to my last point. We've represented all sorts of people in court, right? I'll tell you someone who you were involved with, right? Maxim and Alina Sardakov, right? Professor Mandelblit will remember their name. Maxim and Alina made Aliyah because of you. You're responsible for them, more than the people of Israel. They made Aliyah in 1993 in 2nd grade. They went to school in, they both went to 2nd grade in Ashkelon, PS3. They grew up together by the time they were 16. They were a couple. By the time they were 18, they drafted together. Maxim made Aliyah because his mom is Jewish. Alina made Aliyah because her dad is Jewish. They went to the army, and they said to Alina, you're never going to be able to get married to Maxim unless you go through a conversion. The army has a conversion program, as many of you know. Today in Israel, 6% of Israel's Jewish population is not halachically Jewish. 6%. My son, who's now in Gaza, when he came out of Lebanon in November, they had a bar mitzvah for one of the kids, and my son said, my son's a commander. He has 54 soldiers under his leadership. One of his soldiers had missed his son's bar, in the reserves, right? One of his soldiers had missed his son's bar mitzvah. They had a bar mitzvah under the tanks. And my son said, Abba, for the first time I realized what it is that you do. Because we had a bar mitzvah for these kids, and 3 of our soldiers said, why am I here? And how could it possibly be that we were in Lebanon? And he said this to me, it's very painful. He said, when we were in Lebanon, those 3 soldiers were counted for the minyan. But when we came out and had the bar mitzvah, they weren't counted for the minyan. And Maxim and Alina said, we want to be part of this. So Alina went through the conversion program in the army, and Alina has a conversion certificate from the chief rabbi of Israel. And years after, right, at Maxime and Alina's wedding, which I performed under the auspices of the chief rabbinate, and you'll hear why in a minute, at their wedding when the major television station in Israel came to film us, and Maxime looked at the camera and he said, when they dropped me, and I'm in field intelligence, they dropped me on this side of the Litani River in Lebanon, he said, no one questioned my girlfriend's conversion. But in 2012, when they came into Ashkelon, Rabbi Bloy, who was the chief rabbi of Ashkelon, said, I don't accept the army conversions. And she said, but I'm holding a conversion certificate of the chief rabbi of Israel. And he said, I don't accept them. Go to the rabbinical courts. The rabbinical court supported her standing, but it didn't make a difference for Rabbi Bloy. I assure you, when he tells this story, he doesn't call me Rabbi Farber. And in the end, in 16 rabbinates and 40 soldiers were being told, even though they'd converted under the auspices of the chief rabbi, I'm not talking about private conversions that I'm involved in. I'm not talking about non-Orthodox. I'm talking about conversion to the chief rabbinate. They wouldn't accept it, and we sued. We sued the chief rabbinate to recognize their own conversions. Only Kafka could make that up. I can't. What I'm telling you is because we went to court, because we weren't willing to let anybody say mi ela anymore. Today in Israel, every rabbinate has a registrar that registers converts. It's illegal not to register converts. It's just illegal. We've changed things. And this is my takeaway. This is what I want you to walk home with. There's an existential problem. People are challenging people's identities. We need to work towards this place where people say, Banayim, these are my children. This is part of a bigger story. There's an unbelievable story that we are blessed to live in this generation. We are blessed, all of us, people living in Israel, people living here in North America, in the former Soviet Union, in South America, and in Europe, and in Australia. South Africa, maybe a little less. But we're blessed to live in a moment where our family is coming together. And we can't, for even a moment, give up the dream of what it means for our family to come together. And I leave you with one sentence. Let no one tell you in the area of religious pluralism that Israel is 76 or 77 years old. Let no one tell you that. Israel is 77 years young. There's no reason to think we would have gotten it right by now. Things have happened. There's been changes in our community, seismic changes in our community. But it's up to us and our children to change that. And if you want to know how much it is, so Rabbi Tucker left out of my biography. My son who I talked about before, his name is Moshe. He's named after my grandfather, Moshe. My grandfather was born in Pressburg. He was named after his great-grandfather, the founder of ultra-Orthodoxy, Khatam Sofer. I'm proud to be part of that family, even though I don't look like them, even though I probably don't talk like them. But I'd like to believe, or maybe I'm just fooling myself, that the seismic changes that my great-great-great-grandfather made provide not a challenge for me, but an opportunity. We're young enough to change things. We're doing it. And together, we're going to move this project forward. Thank you.
Good morning. First of all, I want to add my thanks to this organizing this convention. I was so excited to hear everybody yesterday that I thought, oh my God, we need to, to get to this level. But when I've heard you, Rabbi Farber, I thought about the sentence, like in my mind, maybe it's Pesach that is coming. בכל דור ודור חייב אדם לראות את עצמו כאילו הוא יצא ממצרים. Every generation, a person needs to see himself like he's the one who got out from Egypt. And I thought every generation we have to fight for our freedom. Every generation fight for freedom in different ways, in different levels. And this is our generation, and this is our time. And we're doing that. And we're doing that in different ways. And I think many times it's pretty hard and sometimes make you feel like there is no point to find the government with it or to fight the institutions, although we do that together as coalitions. And I want to say, and we're probably going to refer to that, the fact that there are coalitions who can have Orthodox organization, Reform, conservative, even secular organizations that deal with Jewish pluralism in Israel today means a lot. It's not an obvious thing, and I think it means something about what we feel compared to what the government actually does or do not necessarily do. But since the Masorti movement is, I want to see that as a grassroots organization that work on two levels. One, we work with communities around the country and people, and we work for the Israeli society. We're here in Israel, to work for and make Israel a better Jewish, pluralistic, democratic state. Not just for conservative Jews, for Israelis, a better Jewish, pluralistic, democratic state. The Masorti movement, in my eyes as CEO, is a vehicle for that. A vehicle that help conservative Jews, but help Israelis all over the country. Even if they're not, I'm stating that I'm a member of the conservative movement for all my life. They don't have to sign as a conservative Jews. They just need to be Israelis who want to enjoy from their Jewish life, pluralistic Judaism, egalitarian Judaism in Israel, by the halakha. We're an address for them, and we want to be addressed for them. For years, we tried to fight and say, unless we're going to get the approval from the government, we won't do that. We knew, and we know today more than ever, that we can change things on the ground. Since Avichai Mendelblit is sitting here, and he was part of the, and we just talked about it yesterday, about part of the agreement about the Kotel that was not accepted by the government eventually. I want to tell you one story about the Kotel, and I think that represents many times what's going on. We have a small part at the Kotel that is an egalitarian that's called Azarat Israel. I hope all of you visited there. If you haven't yet, please make sure that in your next visit in Israel, you're there. This place was built because of a pressure, a lot of pressure, and the pressure came mainly because American Jewry thought, we're coming to Israel and we have no place at the Kotel. We can't have an egalitarian prayer. It started, by the way, with conservative rabbis that started this fight many, many years ago. And it took years and years to achieve that. And it's not what we dream of. We wanted to have a place that's going to be big enough and going to be nice enough and going to be able to host everybody. But we got a place that is small and has a very horrible platform, but there is a platform. And today, when we're talking about this area, we're talking, and the Masorti movement runs this place to give all the religious services on the ground there. So it's a beautiful archaeological garden that the government gave and said, okay, we give you the platform, but that's all. From this point, you're by yourself. And we use this place for prayers, and we use this place for services of bar and bat mitzvah. And it started with a few families that came from North America and some families that came from South America. And every year and every month, we saw more and more people. And today, I'm not talking about the wartime because this is really different, and with all the flights, you all know that it's much more complicated. But let's say September 2023, okay, just before the war, when we're talking about an average busy Monday, and I'm saying busy because we have 40 services per day. Per day. There is no synagogue in the world that can hold 14 services per day. 40 services per day. Now you would think, okay, they're all North Americans. No, there are North Americans and South Americans. And third are Israelis. Israelis that maybe never heard the word pluralistic Judaism, okay? But they practice, by fact, pluralistic Judaism. Because when they can choose, they realize there's another opportunity. There is an opportunity for me to have a service for my child, a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah for my children, in an egalitarian way. And the beauty of this place is that we have 6 services at the same time. One table, conservative family with a woman rabbi. Next to her, reform bar mitzvah with a man rabbi. Next to them, an Orthodox, modern Orthodox family that serve bat mitzvah, and they use the table as a separation, and they stand from both sides of the table. And near them, a secular family from Nahariya that have a service for their child, and another one that comes from Be'er Sheva, and those 6 services, they watch each other. This is an educational moment that I can't even describe. When they realized that the service just next to them by the woman rabbi is actually pretty similar, and it's by the halakha. And this girl that reads the bar mitzvah, she reads beautifully from the Torah. I don't have to teach them what egalitarian Judaism is at that moment. They know what egalitarian Judaism is. I don't have to talk about pluralism at that moment. They know what pluralism at that moment. Since there are more and more organizations, more and more places, we're getting to more and more people, and not just the Masorti movement. We do that, but other organizations do that as well. And bringing Judaism, pluralistic Judaism, to people, more and more people get to know what does it mean, more and more people understand it. So there's a huge gap between what the government allowed us to do and the Chief Rabbinate that is so disconnected from everything that's going on the ground. I must tell you, you just need to see the elections, how they run the elections for the Chief Rabbinate to understand that Israelis has nothing to do with it, nothing to do with that. And the fact how people really feel about their Judaism. And I think this whole term of the last 3 years, 2.5 years, showed us that more and more Israelis actually think we don't need the ultra-Orthodox to hold Judaism for us. We want to take ownership on our own Judaism. We want to do that. It's not going to be the same way, but it's going to be ours. Yesterday, we've talked about relationship, and Rabbi Tamar Elad Eppelbaum mentioned love and connection and how people need to love each other. And I thought about the fear that we're feeling from each other. And I think for many, many years, Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, were afraid from Judaism that's going to be different from them in Israel. And by that, they got a lot of power. And they got a lot of approval from the government, and they got a lot of budgets. And now it's a system that holds itself. We can and we should keep fighting this system. We should fight this system as coalitions. But one of the most important things is that we need to make sure that this fear, we need to decrease this fear. I don't know how to say that in English in the right way. We need to make sure that people will be less afraid from the different Judaism that they see near them. We see Chilonim, secular people in Israel, which is a tricky term, but let's say Chilonim in the Israeli term, that are afraid that from Hadattah, from opposing Judaism on their children, that they're going to become ultra-Orthodox tomorrow. Okay, they're afraid from those systems. Sometimes we talk about, let's have a service in a school or something like that for one of the holidays, and they're like, really, are we okay with the rabbi getting into our school? It's not going to make our children now super Orthodox and they won't eat at my house, at my home tomorrow, okay, and we need to teach them that this is something, and we need to get their trust. Teach is not the right word. We need to get their trust that we're not changing them. We're actually giving them the opportunity to take ownership on their Judaism. And by that, it's a process that this side is afraid from that side, and this side is afraid from this side. And we happen to be many times in the middle that we're thinking, okay, Where do we belong? What do we do with that? But that's exactly our role, to make sure that we can decrease this fear. After one of the horrible events on Tisha B'Av 3 years ago at the Kotel, when ultra-Orthodox kids mainly, with their teachers, came on Motzei Shabbat, that was Tisha B'Av, Erev Tisha B'Av, to the egalitarian Kotel, took the whole place, put a mechitza in the middle, and started to pray in a very loud way that they actually didn't let us pray. And we come every Tisha B'Av, every evening of Tisha B'Av, to pray at the egalitarian Kotel, and they actually took the only place that we could have an egalitarian prayer there. And it was horrible because the words that were there is like, we're fighting for religion. We're fighting. This is a religious war. Now think about it. Tisha B'Av, Kotel, you're standing there with the stones, you see the destruction in front of your eyes, and they're talking about hatred among Jews. It was a horrible, horrible night. Horrible night. And many, many videos came out of this evening. And at one of those moments, I was like, no prayer can be accepted if something like that happens. I mean, no God can hear a prayer that comes by interfering or arresting other Jews from praying. And those videos were all over the media, and some rabbis started to write short notes. Maybe we had to rethink how we do that, and maybe it was not the right thing, or not the right, but we have to rethink if this is our way. And one rabbi wrote, I saw this video of this woman saying no prayer is accepted, and I thought again I thought, this is an opportunity. And I called him. I won't tell you the whole story, it's going to take us 3 hours, but it's a very interesting way how they accepted me eventually. And it was Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, that is very known among the Orthodox community, And I got to his house and I thought, it's going to take us 20 minutes. I'm going to say, thank you for saying what you said. And he's going to say, yeah, okay. And that's it. And I was there for 3.5 hours. And we were talking for 3.5 hours. Now, the talk was very open and very direct. I didn't try to be anybody else than just myself and say, this is who I am. This is why I do that. And he asked very directly, he said, why do you do that? Why do you go to the Kotel? And I said, look, I have 3 boys. They were born in Israel and raised in Israel. I want them to feel that Israel is their home. They can live anywhere else in the world, and they'll be fine. But I want them to feel that Israel is their Jewish home, no matter what. And if you eliminate us from the Kotel, the most important thing, and for me personally, my grandparents met from both sides of my family met at the old city in Jerusalem. So for me, it's this is really family home. If you take me for this place and say to my children, that's not your place, you have no place here, what do you say? What actually you mean by that? What's the next generation future going to be here? We've talked a lot about a lot of things, and I said I'm a pluralistic Jew. He immediately said, I'm not a pluralistic Jew. I said, I think the truth is among a lot of people, a lot of ways to practice Judaism. He said, no, I don't think so. I think you're wrong. But I understand one thing. You're doing that because you really feel that this is an important thing for you. And you're doing that for the next generation. And you're doing that, and I get it, that you want your children to feel at home. I want that for my children as well. This, after 3.5 hours, was the only thing that we could agree about. Okay, all the rest, I thought about women's leaderships. He thought, no, everything was different. Like there was nothing that we could agree about. This was the only thing that we said, I want my children to feel at home. He said, I want my children to feel at home. And this is my commitment, that your children are going to feel at home, and vice versa. That was the beginning. At the end of these 3.5 hours, I said, I came there without telling anyone, it's a long story, but then said, can I tell or write about this meeting? He said, yes. It wasn't an easy thing, like the beginning, like, are you sure? I said, tell people that you met a friend here. A month later, he wrote an article that says, leave that part for conservative and Reform Jews. Let them do that in their own way. We disagree with their way, but we respect it, and we understand that that's their way to connect their Judaism. Now, I think in many times, he was not sure. When we've met, he was sure that I'm doing that just because I want to interrupt him, because I want to, put my finger in his eye. Like I'm doing that in purpose just to make him angry, because I don't want him to practice his Judaism in his own way. And when I said, I don't care about the way you practice your Judaism. I care about how I can practice my Judaism. I care about the fact that I want my children to feel that they can practice their Judaism in their way. I think this is a moment of trust, and I'm talking about it because I think for many times we're so afraid from each other. We're so afraid. Ultra-Orthodox are really, I believe them when they say that. They're afraid of us. The fact that I'm not afraid from them doesn't mean that they're not afraid of me. We need to build trust. We need to work on it, and we need to have more and more Israelis that can take ownership on their Judaism. And by that, we can show that we're not trying to make this state a democratic with no Judaism. Judaism is part of what this country must be. You talked about a body without a soul. It must be there. But still, the fact that we're there with pluralistic Judaism is not against them, is not instead of. It's side by side with. And this is something for a lot of people hard to accept, because you have to give up on power. We know that as, feminism worked for years to be accepted by, men, and it takes time. It's not an easy thing automatically to just let it happen. But it's a process, and the process needs to come from both sides, bottom up, and from government, work with coalitions, in court, with every way we can to actually pursue more and more rules that's going to be more open, understanding, because one of the things that we're seeing that when we grow and we have more and more people, we saw that with marriage, more and more people that getting married outside of the Chief Rabbinate, become more strict. Like they're trying now to, different things but at the same time, we hear the terminology. We're going to be more open, we understand. Yes, we'll check Judaism, but, okay, it's a process, it's a long process. But eventually, we make the revolution. Kids just don't get married through the Chief Rabbinate. So the revolution is here. We should change the Chief Rabbinate. We should change the way government relate and still don't, write married in our ID if I don't get married through the Chief Rabbinate or get accepted by that. We should change it, but at the same time, we have more and more people that understand that Chief Rabbinate is not Judaism. Chief Rabbinate is an institution, and we shouldn't let this institution to define our Judaism. And we have to take ownership on our Judaism, and Israel can and must be Jewish, pluralistic, democratic state, because our people are going to make it like this.
So I want to note for one thing at the outset. You heard a little about my past as a congregational rabbi and as chair of the Masorti Foundation. So one of the things that I heard, and I know my colleagues heard this over and over again, is Yeah, I understand that religious pluralism is an issue, but, Israel is facing so many things that we would call, dvarim shomdim berumo shel olam, that are the highest level of importance, the things that we all talked about yesterday in our various sessions. And we would be challenged, like, can't that just wait for another time? We have to deal with these really important existential issues. And it was interesting to hear, Rabbi Farber, you talking about this as an existential issue. So I just want to note, this really isn't a question for you because I think you've answered it in both of your presentations, that this is not something that is of any lesser importance than the things that we were talking about yesterday. It is part of the very nature and the very way of thinking and the very approach, the very understanding of Zionism in the Jewish state. And it is possible to be concerned. We're Jews, after all. We're good worriers. You can worry about more than one thing at the same time. And these, what we are dealing with this morning is every bit as important, I think. And you have, I think, given the convincing arguments for that, as everything else. Here is a kind of an observation on, going to court and winning in court is one thing. Winning over the public and public understanding is another. They obviously they are connected. You were talking about the end of the book of Breshit. We just finished the end of the book of Shemot. And there's that odd thing there where the tabernacle, the Mishkan, is now filled with holiness, and Moses can't get in. I always have that image in my mind because of something that I learned in being involved in Masorti issues. And Rakefet, as former director of congregations, you can probably talk a little about this, that there was this phenomenon that the congregations there would report that on Yom Kippur, lots and lots of Israelis would come and they would stand right outside synagogues as if they can't quite get in. They want to be there, but not sure that there's a place for them. And this was very touching to me. What this means, because there is this vast sector of Israeli society that calls itself secular, and we've already heard here today that can be a problematic way of describing them. I cannot imagine that all of those people truly have no interest in the spiritual aspects of human life. So I'd like to hear each of you kind of reflect a little bit about what actually is happening in those populations now as a result of the work that each of you do. And then I wish you would talk a little bit about the things that the different movements have been able to do together.
You start.
I'll start. You talked about Yom Kippur. We understand that for Israelis, again, institution, this thing, and that's why they don't get into a synagogue. It's like I have to knock on a door and get permission to get into a synagogue, and the synagogue is automatically those ultra-Orthodox, Chief Rabbinate, all of that. So we're doing in synagogues, of course, but also we've started to do a service of Yom Kippur, and we started with Neila. Just an anecdote, okay? Sorry, I'm taking. It doesn't answer exactly your question, but I think it's an important thing. We're doing Neila, and now we're doing not just Neila, but we've started with Neila in Habima Square. Habima is the biggest city square in Tel Aviv, I think the biggest in Israel. It's a huge place. And we had a rabbi there with 2 people, and we thought, in Sefer Torah, and we thought they're probably going to be like 10 people, maybe 15 will join. But at least we're going to have some kind of presence, especially because we're talking about years that this whole debate of, do we have a mechitza in a public area? We don't have a mechitza. We said, let people see that there is an option without a mechitza to have a Jewish service outside there. Thousands of people were there. Thousands of people. The funniest thing is, I never had so many videos from a prayer like I have from it. Think about it. People who took video on Yom Kippur at the city square of a prayer, but that's exactly the people that come. Those are Israelis that if you ask them to join a synagogue, they'll say, If you ask them who they are, what's their identity, they'll say, I'm Chiloni, okay? I'm secular. But that's exactly the Israeli, I want to say a little bit political term. Because it's easy for us to say, if you don't drive on Shabbat, you're religious. If you do drive on Shabbat, you're secular. But actually, it's much more wider and more complicated. As everything in life, it's not black or white, okay? And many, many Israelis do Kiddush, Shabbat Eve dinner, bar mitzvah, okay? They don't consider themselves as religious, but they still practice something in Judaism and want to connect. And by having this service at the Habima Square, people that could just join and felt like, it's mine, because it's in my area. I don't have to knock on nobody's door. It's an open area. I can just get, closer or more far. I have this ability to connect in different circles. I can get there with my child to see and touch a Sefer Torah, and suddenly it's ours. And many people that I've never knew before, and some of them are celebrities, wrote a day after, like, this is the Judaism that I want. I don't think they're going to join the Masorti movement tomorrow, unfortunately. I wish they were. But that's exactly what we're talking about. They need and want to connect, even though they consider themselves as Chiloni, because knocking on a door of synagogue is something else for them. Having a religious and spiritual life, it's much more important for them.
Going out on their bicycle on the empty streets was not enough for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they want their children to understand, as I said before, why do they live in Israel? Eventually, it's a really hard place to live in, okay? It's not an easy place to choose to live in. And those who choose to live in Israel not do that just because it's comfortable or they were born and just stayed. You need to have something in addition to that. And something in addition is your roots. And if you don't connect to your roots, then, generation after generation, we may lose those roots. Israelis understand it. Even if they think this religious organization or this Orthodox institution is not for me, they need to find their way. And our role is to offer those ways. And I think during the war, we see that happening more and more. People look for something to hold. We talk about hope a lot in those 2 days. Hope is a hard thing, really hard. And there are days that you wake up in the morning and read the news and say, where am I going to? What's going on? What's going to happen tomorrow? We need to make sure that we're going to be okay. How do we make sure that we're going to be okay? If we relate to our history, this is part of our resiliency. If we think about, okay, we were avadim, we were slaves in Egypt, but eventually we got out. We were just we're at the Hostage Square every day, and we were there for Purim every day at 5 p.m., a service of circle of prayer and singing together and just hold the hope together. One, because we understand that we can't do that by ourselves. Nobody can do that by himself. We need community, and being together is being a community, even if you're part of a community for one day at the Hostage Square. And second, because praying and singing together give us hope. And singing is a religious ritual as well. I mean, if you sing Lu Yehi, it's like Let It Be in the American Let It Be, or right? That's the equivalent of song.
That's the Beatles, yeah.
That's a prayer. For many people, that's a prayer. That's a way to hold hope. We all need this spiritual thing. We were there on Purim. We talked, we read the Megillah together. Reading the Megillah together and knowing that eventually it ended with a happy end. That gives us hope. Our history gives us hope. And we're saying that almost every day. We belong to a nation that survived, which means we have it in our genes, not just in biological genes. We have it in our spiritual genes. We have it in our cultural genes. The ability to survive and get through this. It's not easy. It's not going to be in an hour or tomorrow. It may take time, but it can happen, and it will happen to us. And reminding that every day to people, to ourselves, that spiritual thing that we as a religious organization can bring to people and need to bring to people today. That's part of our role in times of war. We can't fight, but it's not less important than fighting. Because those hostages will be back not just because of a deal. The fact that we will have a deal is because we hope and believe that they must and can come back home. If we won't believe that it can happen, it will never happen. That's the basic. We need our politicians to do their role, but we need to do our role as well. We have a role here. And the role is to hold this hope, to make sure that everybody remember that we can, and it's possible, to make this place a better place, that we can have better democracy, that we can have more safetiness, that we can live in peace one day. And we've talked about it yesterday. Peace is not black or white, it's a process. Okay, it's different levels of we can do that and we will do that. That's our role as a religious organization.
Rabbi Farber, yeah.
I think Rakefet does a fabulous job of explaining why community initiatives are the bread and butter of what has to happen in Israel for things to change. It strikes me that there's a dual movement that has to happen. I believe very strongly in community initiatives and even kind of stepping out. It's no secret in Israel that following multiple attempts to change legislation in one area that's particularly close to my heart, which is the issue of conversion to Judaism, particularly because 6% of Jewish Israelis aren't halakhically Jewish. So in 2016, we started the first Yediot Achronot, the largest Israeli daily, called it the first rebellion of the religious Zionist community. And following a whole set of procedures where we tried to change legislation of how conversion works in Israel, the National Conversion Authority, we simply, this is how, by the way, I know I'm Israeli, because we just decided to create facts on the ground and just started converting ourselves, right? We just started performing conversions ourselves. It was the first time the religious Zionist community had moved out of the dream that somehow the chief rabbinate was the be-all, end-all. So I understand the notion, and by the way, today, we're doing 30% of the Orthodox conversions in Israel as a startup, right? With a budget, right? The budget of the National Conversion Authority is 146 million shekel a year. Our budget for this particular program is about 2.5 million shekel a year, and we're doing 30%. So you can do the numbers yourself, right? That being said, even with a number of initiatives that are all certainly not just worthy, but highlight the power that community initiatives can take on. I think there's also a need to kind of force the hand of the religious establishment. I'm going to tell you two stories about October 8th that I was involved in personally. Okay, one more successful than the other, in my humble opinion. Okay, we were in a serious state of shock after Simchat Torah, not unlike you. Maybe you had information before us to a large extent. We convened in our office. I have 30 people working with me, and 9 or 10 lawyers. And we had a meeting on Zoom the next day, and we said, what are the points that we can leverage what our work is to help the situation right now? I sent off 3 letters to the chief rabbi on the 9th or 10th, I don't remember which day it was. The first one related to burial. I was very involved almost 10 years ago in arranging a new system of burial in Israel that allows soldiers who were killed in the line of duty, who weren't halakhically Jewish or weren't able to prove it, but who were fighting in the Israel Defense Forces, to be buried, so to speak, within the fence. Okay, there was a lot of back and forth, halachic back and forth as well, about how exactly to do it, but in the end, there was a modus operandi that was created that enables soldiers who were killed in the line of duty to be buried. I come back to those words that I use all the time, right? Not just with dignity, with respectfulness, right? There's a response to the need of the community. I was involved with that, I think in 2012. I wrote a letter to the chief rabbi and I said, it's simply inconceivable, given the fact that 6% of Israel's Jewish population is not halakhically Jewish, that there weren't people in the Nova Festival who either aren't halakhically Jewish or were studying for conversion. And we need to come up with a way now A directive needs to come out from your office now that says, just like we bury soldiers like that, when these people, when we retrieve their bodies, they're able to be found. They're able to be buried. 3 days later, the second letter I remember was sent a few days later, related to the issue of mikveh. And this is such an important issue for me because I want you to understand what makes Israel different than any other example we've ever had in the last 2,000 years. If you look at a local mikveh here in the States, a local ritual bath, so the average number of people, let's just talk about women for now, who visit that mikveh, I don't know, 100, 200, 500. The number of women who use Israel's mikvahs every year is 600,000. Okay, that is a staggeringly high number. And when you have policy being directed from on top, so you need to have a policy that people can come through the front door and have access. And we've sued the state of Israel to allow women to have autonomy in mikvahs and not to have to use the attendants that are provided by the rabbinate and to not have attendants at all if they don't want. And we've changed the law multiple times. So on the 13th or 14th of October, when there was a massive call-up and there were 300,000 men who were slowly leaving their homes, and there were sirens going off in just about every community in Israel, and then our office started getting calls from women who said, I'm too scared to go to the mikveh, or I have kids at home and my husband's been called up, and what am I supposed to do? And I sent off a letter to the chief rabbi and I said, hey, this is an emergency. We need to open mikvahs during the day, which in traditional halachic practice is not generally done unless there's in a time of emergency. And we wrote a whole brief explaining why this was a time of emergency. Now, the first letter I got back from the chief rabbi said, no, we don't need to do that. And there was a series of letters back and forth until the 30th of October. And on the 30th of October, I got a letter saying, after we had already opened the mikvahs in every city during the day in Israel, with representatives of the Chief Rabbinate, I got a letter thanking us for the initiative to open mikvahs. On the other hand, when it came to the burial of people in the Nova, the response I got was, we know how to answer it. We know how to deal with that. Don't worry. We know how to deal with it. And I kept on writing in my letters, you can see, there's going to be a Chilul Hashem, there's going to be a desecration of God's name. Someone is going to be buried outside the fence who was killed al Kiddush Hashem. For those who are familiar with the halachics of it, so yes, there's a tradition of Rabbi Yoel Circus, right, the Bach from the 16th century in Poland, the 17th century in Poland, who argued this case, and he didn't become the dominant force in halacha. I'm fully aware of that, and I'm fully aware of the Gemara, the Talmudic passages that talk about this issue, and if someone is found in a field, and there's reason to think he was killed in Al Kiddush Hashem, and all of that is okay, and it's important, and it's critical. But what's more critical is that we have a new entity called the State of Israel. And the question is Judaism going to be a moment that sanctifies God's name, or is it going to be a place that horrifies God's name, desecrates God's name? And the truth is we lost that battle. There were two people, two families. But I'll just tell you one follow-up story because it's tragic and it's beautiful at the same time. There were two families that were buried outside the fence, one in Rehovot, one in Beit Shan. Because of that, now we're in the middle of sponsoring legislation that will demand that anybody killed in terrorist incidents, Pulot Eva, will receive the same treatment, whatever their bona fides are. They will be buried, if the family wants, buried in the Jewish cemetery, in a halachic way that doesn't hurt anybody else. We didn't win that battle. But what's much more important is that there was a sense that something has to change here. There has to be a recognition of the significance of this moment. This is not a shtetl anymore. We're not in a shtetl anymore. Not us, living in Israel, not you, living here. We are no longer in a shtetl. Something dramatic has changed. From my perspective, something beautiful, incredible. What an unbelievable opportunity. What generation gets the opportunity to change Jewish life for the next millennia? So it goes slowly, and it goes from the bottom up, but it also goes from the top down. It comes from banging over that. People always ask me, what's in your toolbox? And the answer is a stick and a carrot. That's the truth. A stick and a carrot. If we're not able to change the way an institution that exists and has gigantic budgets, if we're not able to change the way they think, then we're not going to be successful even if we do all the bottom up. And if we don't do the bottom up, we're certainly not going to be able to change the way they think.
Okay, thank you. So we have built 15 minutes of sort of travel time here to the breakout sessions. We don't need 15 minutes. The questions that you have, you'll have lots of time in these breakout sessions, but we have a little time to take maybe 2 questions now. There are microphones there. If you want to raise your hand, microphone will be passed to you. And afterwards, I will reiterate where the breakout sessions will be. Please.
Okay, Rabbi Farber, I don't have the knowledge of Torah. I mean, I certainly remember the story you were talking about with Yosef, his father, on his deathbed, his sons. I remember that. But your story, reminded me of where, in halakha, a Jew is a child of a Jewish mother. So, in my ignorance, was Joseph's wife, Egyptian wife, Jewish, and how did that work? And to the extent that, yes, they are his sons, obviously, but if the wife is not converted lefi halacha, what does that say about the halachic definition of Judaism? And there's that midrash that the first conversion was that of Ruth. And that's why Megillat Ruth is part of Tanakh. So if you could. This is not your main point, but this is my curiosity.
So, do you want to?
Yeah.
So I'll address it for every year in Shavuot in our office we have a bet. Who's going to be the first person to come along and write in the press? If Ruth was converting today, she wouldn't be accepted, right? Every year there's like a pool in the office. If you're asking a historical question, so I think the jury's still out. In other words, we don't, right? In other words, if you're halakha doesn't always speak the language of what we perceive to be historical truth. I think we all know that. The historical development of certain halachot is, the jury's still out. We simply don't have enough concrete information. And even if we had the historical information, we still don't, and from my perspective at least, we still don't have enough capacity we sublimate ourselves at a certain point or I do, to a certain process and halakha. That doesn't mean it's not dynamic, quite the opposite. So whether Osnat Bar Potifera converted halachically or not halachically, that might be an interesting historical question. I don't think it's a significant halachic question. The question of what determines in general how someone converts and the extent to which conversions are accepted or not, I'm going to be as frontal as I can here. This is the Achilles heel of our generation. I'm being nice. Okay? The Israeli Chief Rabbinate, not have they done a disservice to halakha. They have completely twisted halakha. You might remember, because I became famous for publishing the blacklist of the rabbis who the Chief Rabbinate rejected, right, in 2016, because some clerk there made an idiotic mistake. If he was working for me, he would not be working for me anymore, right? When we'd agreed in court that they would give us the list of rabbis they accepted, and he sent me the list of the rabbis they had rejected. That was just stupidity. But the notion that we can, Judaism is so committed to making sure that converts are fully embraced by our community, by everything about, we don't, right? The way we know that someone who is not observant is still part of the Jewish community, we learn that from the convert, according to the Talmud and Masechet Yevamot. Where the convert is the paradigm for the person. Not only do we not check after them, right? Once someone converted, we don't start asking questions at all. So what does it mean that the rabbi of Ashkelon wouldn't accept Alina's conversion? What does it mean that we have lists of rabbis? In this institution, right, where you had, for generations, rabbis who were committed to halacha, what does it mean that all of a sudden, the moment it comes on JTS stationery or RA stationery, like it's automatically rejected? What kind of absurdity is that? Seriously, and I say it with full halachic confidence. I say with full halachic confidence because I've seen it happen the other way for political reasons. I've seen the chief rabbi himself certify conversions that came out of conservative synagogues in North America because there was a family relative involved. That kind of hypocrisy is not acceptable if we believe that we're not a shtetl anymore. If we have enough confidence to get up and say, Mashu chadash karakan, something new is here. We're in a new era in Jewish history where we have a sovereign state and we're proud of the Judaism of that sovereign state. We're not embarrassed about it. We don't start doing backroom deals. That's what we did when we were in fill in the blank. This is our moment of expressing a Judaism that embraces our diversity. I feel strongly, and I think you're with me in this, doesn't compromise on not our values or our principles at all. We do not compromise on our principles. And for me, that means halachic principles. But we don't allow a small group of men, and I make it very clear, men, we don't allow them to rewrite 2,000 years of halachic history to fit their interests. That we're just not going to allow anymore. Because that is not just the destruction of Judaism. That is the destruction, it's the denial of God's hand in history. That simple. It's that simple.
Okay, let's see if we have one more question in here. We got two hands, but yeah.
That's only one question.
Yeah, one microphone.
It's one hand and two questions.
In actual fact, it could go to either of you, and that is that this ownership of being in charge, owning the pathway to God, is not just in Israel. There is evidence of this here in the United States as well. For example, I am a Moyle, and for many years, many years ago, when I started my practice, I did brisses across different groups. One family, very few Orthodox families even spoke to me, but the conservative movement was very welcoming, and so was the Reform. That's where I belong. One family, the rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, said to the grandmother after the bris was over, I heard that you had a bris done, whatever day it was, and that the moil was a woman and she was Reform. It has to be done again. I wouldn't wish that on anybody, frankly.
Thank God I'm not this mother. It's like...
Well, the grandmother, to her credit, said to him, you're an anti-Semitic Jew.
This must be the origin of the bracha shelo asani ish.
But it isn't.
By the way, we're now, must have this comment. We're now building a program for the first time to have women that are mohalot in Israel. We're now working on a program for the first time ever to have women that will be mohalot in Israel.
Wonderful. So. Thank you.
Okay. General hand for our panelists here.